On the night of their fifth anniversary, billionaire Sebastian Montgomery made a fatal mistake. While his 7 months pregnant wife, Genevieve Ainsworth, waited at home beside a dinner for two, he was across town, wining and dining his mistress. He thought he was orchestrating the end of his marriage on his own terms, a controlled demolition from a distance. But he never planned on Genevieve walking through those restaurant doors. The explosion that followed wasn't just about infidelity, it was a public detonation that would leave him utterly humiliated and put his entire empire on the line. Stay tuned. The silence in the Montgomery penthouse was a specific kind, a heavy, expensive silence that absorbed sound. It was the silence of thick Persian rugs laid over marble floors of triple-paned glass that muted the roar of New York City into a distant, inconsequential hum. For Genevieve Ainsworth Montgomery, this silence had once felt like peace. Now, it felt like a tomb. At 32, Genevieve possessed a kind of beauty that seemed both timeless and fragile. Fine-boned, with hair the color of pale honey and eyes the shade of a stormy sea, she moved with the innate grace of old money. Her family, the Ainsworths, were Boston Brahmins, their wealth as established and understated as their ancestral homes. Marrying Sebastian Montgomery 5 years ago had been a merger, a union of her family's legacy with his bombastic new money empire built on aggressive tech acquisitions. They were the city's golden couple. From the outside, their life was an exquisite tapestry. Inside, Genevieve had been pulling at loose threads for months. She stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, one hand resting protectively on the gentle, firm swell of her stomach. 7 months. After years of quiet heartbreak and invasive treatments, this baby was their miracle. It was supposed to be the glue that mended the imperceptible cracks that had formed in their marriage. Instead, the cracks seemed to be widening into chasms. Sebastian had become a ghost in their home. He was there physically, his 6'2" frame, impeccably dressed in a custom Tom Ford suit, the scent of his oud cologne lingering in a room long after he'd left. But his attention, his warmth, his spirit, those were absent. He lived through his phone, his thumbs a constant blur across the screen, a small, secretive smile sometimes touching his lips. When she'd ask who he was texting, the answer was always the same, clipped, dismissive litany, "Work, Jen, always work." Tonight was their 5th anniversary. She had booked a private chef, arranged for her favorite peonies to fill the apartment, and laid out the sapphire earrings he had given her on their 1st anniversary. It was a desperate, hopeful attempt to reclaim what they had lost. At 6 p.m., he breezed in, tossing his briefcase onto a velvet chaise. He didn't kiss her. He kissed the air near her cheek. "Evening," he said, already loosening his tie. "Don't wait up for me. I've got that late dinner with the Japanese investors. We're trying to close the Kenjiro deal." Genevieve's heart, which had been fluttering with fragile anticipation, plummeted. "Sebastian, it's tonight, our anniversary." He paused halfway to the bedroom and turned. For a moment, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, guilt perhaps, but it was extinguished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a mask of mild irritation. "Right. Damn. Look, Jen, I'm sorry, this deal is massive. Billions on the line. We'll celebrate this weekend. I'll take you anywhere you want to go. We'll fly to Paris. Just for the weekend. How about that?" He didn't wait for an answer. He disappeared into their cavernous walk-in closet. The promise of Paris was a practiced deflection, a shiny object meant to distract her from the immediate hurt. It used to work. It wasn't working anymore. She followed him, her slippers whispering on the carpet. "The chef is already here, Sebastian. I cancelled my spot at the Children's Foundation benefit for this." He emerged wearing a fresh shirt his focus on his cufflinks. Well, uncancel it. Or enjoy the meal yourself. Give the chef a big tip. We can afford it. His cruelty was casual, almost an afterthought. That's what hurt the most. He didn't even have the energy to argue properly. She was an item on his to-do list that he was rescheduling. "Where is the dinner?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. "L'Étoile," he said, without thinking. They're very particular about punctuality. L'Étoile, the Star, the city's most exclusive, most romantic restaurant where a reservation was harder to get than a private audience with the Pope. It was where he had proposed to her. The irony was so thick, so suffocating, she felt she might choke on it. A business dinner with Japanese investors at the most intimate French restaurant in the city. The lie was not just a lie. It was an insult to her intelligence. She watched him spritz on his cologne, adjust his Patek Philippe watch. He looked every inch the billionaire titan of industry. He looked like a stranger. "All right, Sebastian," she said, her voice betraying none of the turmoil inside her. She smoothed down the front of her silk maternity gown. "Have a successful dinner." He gave her a brief, satisfied smile, pleased by her easy capitulation. "That's my girl. I'll make it up to you big time." He leaned in for another air kiss and was gone. The heavy front door closing with a soft, definitive click that echoed the closing of a door in her heart. The silence returned heavier than before. The scent of peonies and gourmet cooking now seemed funereal. Genevieve walked over to the table set for two, with its gleaming silver and crystal. She looked at the empty chair where her husband should be. The baby gave a soft kick, a gentle reminder of the life she was carrying, the future she was fighting for. But the fight, she was beginning to realize, was not what she thought it was. It wasn't about reclaiming his love. It was about surviving his betrayal. She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling slightly. She didn't call her mother or her best friend. She called the one person in Sebastian's orbit whose loyalty she had always trusted, a quiet, unassuming man who saw everything. "Mr. Pembroke," she said, her voice low. "I need a favor. I need to know about my husband's reservation at L'Étoile tonight." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Mr. Pembroke had been Sebastian's personal driver and assistant for a decade, a man of profound discretion. His silence was his answer. "Please, Alistair," she whispered, using his first name for the first time in years. "For me." Another pause, then a sigh, heavy with regret. "Mrs. Montgomery, the reservation is for two, but the name of the second guest, it is not a Mr. Kenjiro." The words hung in the air, confirming a truth she already knew in her bones. The tomb had cracked open, and the cold, hard reality was starting to seep in. Sebastian Montgomery navigated his custom-built Aston Martin through the canyons of Manhattan with the same predatory grace he applied to the stock market. He felt a surge of adrenaline, a cocktail of power, guilt, and exhilarating freedom. Guilt was a fleeting, inconvenient emotion he'd learned to compartmentalize. Freedom, however, was the drug he chased, and Cassandra Vance was his newest, most potent dose. He glanced at the passenger seat. Cassie was everything Genevieve was not. Where Genevieve was classic elegance, Cassie was modern fire. Her hair was a sharp, jet-black bob. Her lips were painted a defiant crimson, and her laughter was loud and uninhibited. She was 26, a hungry, up-and-coming art curator he'd met at an Art Basel party he'd attended without his wife. She wasn't a gold digger, not in the traditional sense. That's what he told himself. She was ambitious, intelligent, and fascinated by his power, not just his money. She made him feel young, vital, seen in a way Genevieve no longer did. Genevieve, with her charities, Her societal obligations, and now her pregnancy, represented a life of dignified predictability, a beautiful high-stakes cage. Cassie represented a thrilling escape. "Are you sure about this, Seb?" Cassie asked, her voice a low purr. She ran a perfectly manicured finger along the polished walnut dashboard. "Your wife, an anniversary. It feels necessary," he interrupted smoothly. He reached over and took her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "Jen and we've been drifting for a long time. The marriage has become a business arrangement. The pregnancy, it was an accident, a last-ditch effort that we didn't expect to work. It's complicated. It was a masterful blend of truth and fiction. They had been drifting. The IVF had been a long shot, but calling it an accident was a lie, designed to absolve him, to paint him as a fellow victim of circumstance. Tonight isn't for her," he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's for us. It's time I stopped hiding you. It's time I started living my life for me. L'Etoile, it's a symbolic place. It's where one chapter of my life began, and tonight it's where it will end." Cassie's eyes, a striking shade of emerald green, widened. "End? You mean you're going to tell her I'm going to begin the process?" He clarified, the careful wording of a CEO negotiating terms. "This dinner is the first step. A statement. People will see us. It will get back to her. It's better this way. Cleaner than some tearful, messy confrontation at home." It was a breathtakingly cowardly and arrogant plan, born of a narcissism so profound he genuinely believed it was logical. By being seen with Cassie, he would force the issue, creating an irrefutable public fact that would make the inevitable separation Genevieve's reaction, not his action. He would be the man who had moved on. She would be the wife who couldn't handle it. He controlled the narrative. He always controlled the narrative. When they arrived at L'Etoile, the maitre d', a severe-looking man named Antoine, greeted him with the practiced deference reserved for the city's true royalty. "Monsieur Montgomery, a pleasure. Your table is ready." Antoine's eyes flickered to Cassie for a microsecond, a flicker of professional surprise that he quickly masked. He knew Mrs. Montgomery well. Sebastian ignored it. He guided Cassie through the hushed, candlelit dining room, a space so intimate that every table felt like a private island. The air was thick with the scent of truffles and old money. Heads turned, whispers followed in their wake like the ripples from a stone tossed into a still pond. He recognized at least a half-dozen people, a rival hedge fund manager, a Broadway producer, the editor of a powerful gossip column. Perfect. He had reserved the best table in the house, a secluded corner booth with a panoramic view of the park, the very table where he had asked Genevieve to be his wife. The cruelty of the choice was a demonstration of his power, a signal that he could overwrite their shared history with a new one. "It's beautiful." Cassie breathed, her initial nervousness melting away under the force of his confidence. "Only the best," he said, ordering a bottle of Cristal champagne. He conveniently forgot that Genevieve's obstetrician had advised him not to drink, in solidarity with her. As the champagne was poured, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, a text from his COO about the Kenjiro deal. He fired off a quick reply, feeling the familiar thrill of command. He could juggle it all: his empire, his wife, his mistress. He was Sebastian Montgomery, and the world bent to his will. So Cassie said, leaning forward, her eyes sparkling in the candlelight. Tell me about this new chapter. What does it look like? Sebastian smiled, a slow, predatory smile. It looks like you. It looks like my jet, but not for a weekend in Paris. For a month in the Maldives. It looks like you on the cover of Art World magazine with the Montgomery Foundation backing your new gallery. It looks like whatever we want it to be. He was selling her a future, and she was buying it. She had no reason to doubt him. He had lied to her with the same flawless conviction with which he lied to his shareholders, his board of directors, and his wife. He believed his own performance. In his mind, he wasn't just a cheater, he was a romantic hero, bravely breaking free from a loveless prison to be with the woman he truly desired. He raised his glass. To new beginnings. To new beginnings, she echoed her glass, clinking against his. Across the room, the gossip columnist discreetly snapped a photo with her phone. The ripples were already turning into waves. Sebastian saw it, and he felt a savage sense of satisfaction. The fuse was lit. He just had to wait for the explosion. He had no idea he was sitting at ground zero. The confirmation from Alistair Pembroke landed in Genevieve's soul like a shard of ice. For a few long moments, she simply stood motionless in the center of her opulent living room, the phone still pressed to her ear. The scent of the anniversary dinner she had so lovingly planned, seared scallops and truffle risotto, wafted from the kitchen, a nauseating mockery of her naivety. The reservation is for two. But the name of the second guest, it is not a Mr. Kenjiro. Betrayal was a physical thing. It started as a cold knot in her stomach, then spread through her veins, a chilling poison that made her limbs feel heavy, her head light. Her first instinct was to collapse, to retreat into the silken prison of her bed and let the tears come. It would have been the easy thing to do, the expected thing. It was the reaction of the Genevieve everyone knew, poised, gentle, accommodating. But as she stood there, another feeling began to stir beneath the pain. It was a slow, hot current of rage, an emotion so foreign and so potent it startled her. The rage burned away, the shock melted the ice, and in its place forged something hard and sharp. The baby kicked again, more forcefully this time, as if sensing its mother's shift in spirit. It wasn't a plea for protection. It felt like a call to arms. She was not just Genevieve Ainsworth Montgomery's society wife. She was an Ainsworth, a descendant of governors and shipping magnates, women who had weathered wars and financial collapses with iron wills hidden beneath silk gloves. She was the mother of a child who deserved better than a coward for a father and a fool for a mother. The tears that had threatened to fall evaporated. Her spine straightened. The fragile beauty was gone, replaced by a crystalline resolve. She was done being the victim in his story. Tonight, she would write her own chapter. "Thank you, Alistair," she said into the phone, her voice now steady and clear as a bell. "You've been a better friend to me than he has been a husband." She ended the call before he could reply. Her mind, once clouded with hurt, was now working with terrifying clarity. What was his goal? A public humiliation. He had chosen L'Etoile, their place, knowing it would be full of their circle. He wanted to be seen. He wanted the news to crawl back to her, to break her from a distance. He was a coward, orchestrating a war by proxy. He would not have his proxy war. He would have a direct confrontation. She strode into her bedroom, bypassing the closet filled with elegant maternity dresses. She went instead to a section she hadn't touched in months, the clothes from her life before the pregnancy, before the final desperate hope that a baby would fix them. She pulled out a dress of deep crimson silk. It was a bold, striking piece designed to cling and command attention. It would be tight over her bump, an unapologetic declaration of her state. She was not a wilting flower. She was a woman carrying life, a life he had helped create, and was now so casually discarding. As she did her makeup, her hands were rock steady. She lined her eyes, a sharp, dramatic cat eye. She chose a dark, vampiric shade of lipstick, the color of dried blood. She looked at herself in the mirror. The woman, looking back, was not the one Sebastian had left an hour ago. This was a queen, preparing for battle. The sapphire earrings he'd given her felt wrong-tainted. She replaced them with a pair of large diamond and onyx earrings, an Ainsworth family heirloom. They felt like armor. She walked back into the living room. The private chef, a kindly man named Pierre, looked up from the stove with a worried expression. "Madame Montgomery, is everything all right? Monsieur is late." "There's been a change of plans," Pierre Genevieve said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Dinner is cancelled. Please pack everything up. Send the bill for your full service to my husband's office and add a significant inconvenience fee." Pierre's eyes widened, but he simply nodded. "Oui, madame." Genevieve slipped on a pair of sharp stiletto heels, impractical, painful, perfect. She grabbed a small clutch and her phone. Before leaving, she paused by the table, set for two. With a deliberate, steady hand, she picked up the single perfect peony from the vase in the center of the table and snapped its stem. The quiet crack was deeply satisfying. She didn't call a car service. She walked out to the street and hailed a yellow cab, the kind of transport Sebastian would have sneered at. The city lights blurred past a river of gold and neon. During the ride, she didn't rage or cry. She planned. She thought about prenuptial agreements, about company bylaws, about the shares in Montgomery Tech that were held in her name as part of the marriage merger. She thought about the Ainsworth legal team, a pack of sharks who had been with her family for generations. Sebastian thought this was a personal drama. He had forgotten it was also a business transaction, and he was about to make a very, very bad trade. When the cab pulled up to L'Etoile, she didn't hesitate. She paid the driver, stepped onto the curb, and took a deep, steadying breath. The doorman, accustomed to her arriving on the arm of Sebastian, rushed to open the door, his face a mask of confusion. "Mrs. Montgomery?" "What a surprise, I'm sure it is," she said, her voice like Arctic air. She swept past him, her crimson dress a slash of color in the restaurant's muted golden ambiance. Every head in the room turned. The whispers that had followed Sebastian and Cassie now fell into a stunned, absolute silence. The air crackled with tension. The gossip columnist's eyes were wide with predatory glee. This was a story beyond her wildest dreams. Genevieve's gaze swept the room, calm and imperious, until it landed on the corner booth. Their booth. She saw him laughing, leaning intimately towards a woman she had never seen before, a woman who was young, beautiful, and sitting in her seat. She saw the bottle of Cristal. She saw his hand resting on the other woman's. And in that moment, Sebastian looked up. His eyes met hers across the room. His smile froze, then fell from his face. The color drained from his cheeks. The look on his face was one of pure, unadulterated shock, the panic of a master strategist whose perfect plan had just been detonated in his face. Genevieve began to walk towards him. Each step was deliberate, measured. The click of her heels on the polished floor was the only sound in the dead silent room. It was the sound of a clock ticking down to zero. The storm hadn't just gathered. It had arrived. The walk across the dining room of L'Etoile felt like a mile. With every step, Genevieve could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her, a mixture of pity, morbid curiosity, and shock. The silence was so profound, it was like a physical pressure pressing in on her. She ignored it all. Her entire universe had narrowed to the corner booth and the two people sitting in it. Cassie Vance felt the shift in atmosphere first. The sudden silence, the collective intake of breath. She saw Sebastian's face change, the confident, seductive charm dissolving into a mask of pale horror. She turned her head, following his gaze, and saw a woman walking towards them. A stunning, incredibly pregnant woman in a blood-red dress, with eyes that looked like chips of ice. It took Cassie a moment to connect the dots. The wife. The pregnant wife. The one he'd said he was leaving. Seb. Cassie whispered, her voice laced with confusion. "Who is that?" Sebastian didn't answer. He was paralyzed, caught in the headlights of a disaster entirely of his own making. He had planned for whispers, for rumors, for a controlled demolition. He had not planned for this, for Genevieve in the flesh, looking like an avenging angel here, to preside over his public execution. Genevieve reached the table. She didn't look at Cassie, not yet. Her gaze was locked on her husband. She stood there for a long moment, allowing the tableau to sear itself into the memory of everyone watching. The billionaire, his mistress, and his 7 months pregnant wife. "Sebastian," she said. Her voice wasn't a shout. It was worse. It was calm, controlled, and dripping with contempt. "I believe you have my seat." The simple sentence landed with the force of a physical blow. Sebastian flinched. He started to stand, knocking his knee against the table in his haste. "Genevieve, what are you doing here?" I thought. "We can talk about this at home." "Home?" Genevieve let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of any humor. "You mean that place you occasionally visit between business trips?" "No, I don't think so." "You wanted a public statement, Sebastian. So here I am. Let's make a statement." Her eyes finally moved to Cassie. She took in the younger woman's sharp beauty, her expensive dress, her confused and dawning horror. Genevieve saw not an enemy, but another casualty of Sebastian's colossal ego. "And you must be the Japanese investor," Genevieve said, her voice softening with a chilling sort of pity. "He has a real talent for mergers and acquisitions, doesn't he, tell me? Did he promise you the world? A new gallery? Perhaps a life free of complications?" Cassie stared, speechless. Genevieve had just articulated the exact promises Sebastian had made not 10 minutes earlier. The realization that she was not a partner in his new life, but simply a pawn in the destruction of his old one, hit her with sickening force. She looked at Sebastian, her expression shifting from adoration to disbelief, and then to fury. "What is she talking about, Seb?" Cassie demanded, her voice rising. "Jen, stop it. You're making a scene." Sebastian hissed, his face now a blotchy red. He reached for her arm. Genevieve pulled back as if his touch were venomous. "A scene," she repeated, her voice rising in volume, finally cracking with the raw pain she had held in check. "You dare to talk to me about making a scene? You bring your whore to our restaurant, to our table, on our anniversary, while I am at home pregnant with your child, and you talk to me about making a scene." The word whore echoed in the silent room. Cassie recoiled as if she'd been slapped. This was it. The precipice. The point of no return. Genevieve looked at the table between them. The champagne, the half-eaten appetizers, the symbol of his betrayal. All the hurt, the lies, the months of quiet anguish, the calculated cruelty of this evening, it all coalesced into a single white-hot point of rage. With a sudden guttural cry that was torn From the depths of her soul, she leaned forward, gripped the edge of the heavy oak table, and shoved. The sound was explosive. A crash of shattering crystal, the clatter of silverware, the sickening, wet thud of food hitting the floor and the people around it. The bottle of Cristal cartwheeled through the air, spraying champagne over a horrified banker at the next table. A plate of oysters slid directly into Sebastian's lap. The entire carefully constructed scene of illicit romance was instantly obliterated, replaced by a chaotic, sticky, humiliating mess. Gasps rippled through the restaurant. Several people instinctively pulled out their phones, the red lights of recording videos blinking in the dim light. Sebastian was on his feet now, dripping with champagne and seafood, his face a mask of utter fury and disbelief. "Are you insane?" he roared. But Genevieve was already turning away. She hadn't overturned the table in a moment of uncontrolled hysteria. It was a calculated act of symbolic destruction. She was tearing down their life right here, right now, on her own terms. She took one last look at the wreckage, at her humiliated husband and his stunned mistress sitting amidst the debris of their sordid little dinner. She felt nothing but a cold, clean emptiness. She turned her back on him, on them, on the entire life they had built. As she walked towards the exit, her head held high, her crimson dress a beacon in the chaos, she delivered her final line loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Have a successful dinner, Sebastian. It looks like the deal is off." Then she was gone, leaving behind a dead-silent room, the stench of spilled wine, a ruined billionaire, and the smoldering ashes of a marriage. The humiliation was absolute. It was public, and it was just the beginning. The immediate aftermath of the table flip was a study in chaos. For a few seconds, no one moved. The patrons of L'Étoile were frozen, a captive audience to a drama far more compelling than any Broadway show. Then the spell broke. Antoine, the maitre d', rushed forward with two waiters, not to accost Genevieve, but to manage the scene, his face a grim mask of damage control. Sebastian Montgomery stood dripping in the middle of the wreckage. His Tom Ford suit, a symbol of his power and wealth, was stained with champagne and vinaigrette. An oyster clung precariously to his lapel. The whispers started again, this time not with curiosity, but with unconcealed scorn and derision. The flash of a phone camera cut through the dim light. The gossip columnist Catherine Reed, capturing the money shot. His humiliation was a palpable force radiating from him in waves. He, who meticulously controlled every aspect of his life and image, had been rendered a public spectacle, a clown in his own circus. "Get out," he snarled at Cassie, his voice low and venomous. His grand romantic gesture had backfired spectacularly, and like all narcissists in the face of failure, he needed a target for his rage. She was the most convenient one. Cassie, who was still spattered with food and shock, stared at him. The man who had promised her the world just moments ago was now looking at her with pure hatred. The illusion shattered completely. "Me," she shot back, her voice shaking with fury. "You lied to me. You used me. You told me it was over between you. You told me she wouldn't be here. I told you to be discreet. I didn't tell you to sit there and let my wife ambush us." He lied desperately, trying to rewrite history in his favor. "Your wife didn't ambush us, Sebastian. She ambushed you," Cassie retorted, her intelligence returning with a vengeance. She stood up, brushing crumbs from her dress with as much dignity as she could muster. "You're a coward and a liar, and to think I almost felt sorry for you." She grabbed her purse and, without a backward glance, pushed her way through the gawking diners and out of the restaurant, leaving him utterly alone in his self-made disaster. Sebastian, now abandoned by both wife and mistress, felt a primal urge to scream, to smash what was left of the table, to assert the dominance that had so utterly failed him. But he was surrounded by his peers, his rivals. He saw Alastair Finch, his primary competitor in the tech space, watching from a nearby table, with a look of pure, unadulterated pleasure. Finch raised his glass in a mock toast. The shame was a physical burn. Sebastian threw a black Amex card on a clean corner of a nearby table. "Cover everything," he barked at Antoine. "And if a single photo from this room leaks, I'll buy this restaurant just to fire you." It was an empty threat, and they both knew it. The story was already out. Catherine Reed was probably typing the headline on her phone as she walked out the door. Montgomery meltdown billionaire's anniversary dinner ends in ruins as pregnant wife crashes the party. As Sebastian strode towards the exit, his composure a fragile shell. Around a core of pure rage, he was met by a fresh hell. The doorman must have tipped off the paparazzi. A wall of flashing lights erupted as he stepped onto the sidewalk. "Sebastian, is it true you were dining with a mistress, Mr. Montgomery? What's the status of your marriage? Who was the woman, Seb?" He shoved his way through the pack, his face a thunderous mask, and threw himself into his Aston Martin. He sped away, the squeal of his tires the only answer he could give. He drove aimlessly for an hour, the city lights a meaningless blur. His phone was exploding with calls and texts, his PR chief, his lawyer, his mother. He ignored them all. He had been humiliated, but more than that, he had been outmaneuvered. Genevieve's actions were not the hysterical rampage of a scorned woman. They were precise, strategic, and devastatingly effective. The choice of dress, the walk across the room, the controlled fury, the table flip, it was all a performance, a piece of corporate theater designed for maximum impact. She hadn't just ended their dinner, she had launched a hostile takeover of the narrative. He was no longer the powerful man moving on. He was the pathetic, cheating husband caught in the act. He finally drove home back to the silent penthouse. He expected to find it in disarray, perhaps with her things gone. Instead, it was pristine. The kitchen was spotless, the scent of the cancelled dinner completely gone. The table for two had been cleared. The broken peony was gone. It was as if she and their anniversary had been erased. The only thing out of place was a single sheet of paper on the hall table. It wasn't a letter. It was a document from the law firm of Ainsworth, Finch and Barrett. It was a formal notice. Effective immediately, Genevieve Ainsworth Montgomery was filing for an injunction to freeze all jointly held assets pending a formal review of their prenuptial agreement, citing gross marital misconduct. Furthermore, as a significant shareholder in Montgomery Tech, she was calling for an emergency meeting of the board to discuss the potential reputational and financial risk posed by the CEO's recent conduct. Sebastian's blood ran cold. This wasn't a divorce. This was a declaration of war. She wasn't coming for his heart. She was coming for his company. The humiliation at the restaurant was just the opening salvo. The real battle, the one that would determine his future, his legacy and his fortune, had just begun. He had thought he was playing chess, but he had just discovered that Genevieve had flipped the entire board over, and he was the only piece left in a pile of wreckage. While Sebastian was reeling from his public disgrace, Genevieve was not at home crying into a pillow. She was in a discreet, wood-paneled office in Midtown, a fortress of old-world law and new-world aggression. This was the headquarters of Ainsworth, Finch and Barrett, her family's law firm. The Finch was no relation to Sebastian's rival. It was a name that had been tied to the Ainsworths for a century. With her sat two men. The first was Carter Barrett, a 60-year-old lawyer with eyes like a hawk and a reputation for surgically dismantling his opponents in court. The second was her older brother, Donovan Ainsworth. Donovan was the antithesis of Sebastian. Where Sebastian was slick polish, Donovan was raw power. A former Marine turned venture capitalist, he had the same stormy eyes as his sister, but his were set in a rugged, imposing face. He had distrusted Sebastian from day one. "You did well tonight," Jen Donovan said, his voice a low rumble. He handed her a glass of water. "You took control. Now we press the advantage." Carter Barrett slid a thick binder across the mahogany table. "The injunction is filed. By 7 a.m. tomorrow, he won't be able to move $1 from any joint account without our approval. The call for the board meeting has been sent to all members. As the face of the company, his public implosion gives us significant leverage." Genevieve nodded, her focus absolute. The emotional storm had passed, leaving behind a cold, clear, strategic mind. The prenup, he was so proud of it. He called it an ironclad fortress. "Every fortress has a back door," Carter said, with a thin smile. "Sebastian designed it to protect his premarital assets, which is standard. However, Clause 11B, the infidelity clause, is our way in. He assumed it would be used to negotiate a higher settlement for you. He never imagined it could be used to question his fitness as CEO of a company in which you hold a significant, contractually tied stake." Donovan leaned forward. "Your shares, Jenna, your 10%. When you married him, Dad insisted your stake wasn't just a gift. It was a check and balance. Sebastian's reputation is now a liability to the company's stock price. The board has a fiduciary duty to act. We're not just arguing about a marriage, we're arguing about shareholder value." This was the Ainsworth gambit. They were transforming a messy divorce into a corporate coup. Sebastian had underestimated her, and more foolishly, he had underestimated her family. But as the strategic talk swirled around her, Donovan paused, his expression softening as he looked at his sister. The rage in his eyes was replaced by a deep, protective concern. "Jen, are you all right?" "Really?" he asked. "Forget the money, forget the company. What he did to you, to the baby?" Genevieve's composure finally wavered. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. "He killed what was left of us, Donnie. He killed it on purpose. He was always a snake," Donovan growled. "I never understood what you saw in him, especially after he said what he did about the treatments." Genevieve froze. "What are you talking about?" Donovan hesitated, looking at Carter, then back at his sister. "A few months ago, at the club, he'd had a few too many scotches. I was congratulating him cautiously on you being pregnant. And he just laughed. It was a bitter sound. He said something like, 'A miracle, that's what she calls it.' Or maybe just good timing from the mailman. He implied the baby wasn't his." The air left Genevieve's lungs. It was a betrayal so profound, so much deeper than simple adultery, that it threatened to undo the iron resolve she had so carefully constructed. Sebastian didn't just cheat on her. He suspected her of cheating on him and had used that suspicion to justify his own affair. He had poisoned their one miracle before it had even begun. "But why?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He knows his issues. 2 years prior, after a severe illness, a doctor had given Sebastian a grim prognosis, about his fertility. The chances were astronomically low. It had crushed him, striking at the core of his virile, powerful self-image. The subsequent rounds of IVF had been her idea, her hope. He had participated, reluctantly, already resigned to failure. And here was the final, devastating twist. The secret she had been holding on to, the one she had planned to reveal tonight as the ultimate anniversary surprise. She looked at her brother, her eyes filled with a fresh, tragic pain. "He's wrong, Donnie," she said, her voice barely audible. "He's so wrong." She reached into her clutch and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She had been carrying it with her all night, a talisman of hope that was now a relic of a dead dream. She slid it across the table to her brother. It was a lab report from her obstetrician dated 3 weeks ago. It was the result of a non-invasive prenatal paternity test. She had done it secretly, wanting to have irrefutable proof, to present to him alongside her announcement, a grand gesture to erase all his silent masculine fears. Donovan unfolded it. He scanned the technical jargon until he found the conclusion at the bottom. Probability of paternity 99.9. Asinpan subject Sebastian Montgomery. Donovan stared at the paper, then at his sister, his face a canvas of dawning horror and rage. "My God," he breathed. "He doesn't know." "No," Genevieve whispered, another tear falling. "The last round of IVF, it worked. I wanted to surprise him tonight. I wanted to see his face when he knew for sure that he hadn't failed, that we had our miracle, his miracle." The tragic irony was suffocating. The entire edifice of his betrayal, the affair with Cassie, the lies, the public humiliation had been built on a foundation of his own bitter, mistaken insecurity. He had thrown away the one thing he secretly wanted most in the world at the very moment it had been given to him. He hadn't just cheated on his wife, he had betrayed his own unborn child in the most fundamental way possible. Carter Barrett, the lawyer who had watched this exchange in silence, cleared his throat gently. He looked at the paternity test, then at Genevieve, his hawk-like eyes filled not with legal cunning, but with a flicker of human sympathy. "This," he said, his voice low and firm, "changes everything." 3 months later, the New York autumn had turned the leaves in Central Park to shades of gold and rust. The city was the same, but the world of Sebastian and Genevieve Montgomery had been irrevocably altered. The fallout from the L'Etoile incident, as the tabloids called it, had been swift and brutal. Catherine Reed's column had gone viral, and the grainy cell phone videos of the table flip became a global meme. Montgomery Tech's stock plummeted by 15% overnight. The emergency board meeting was a bloodbath. Faced with the infidelity clause, the public relations nightmare, and the quiet, iron-willed pressure from the Ainsworth contingent, Sebastian was given an ultimatum: step down as CEO and take a leave of absence or be forced out in the most public, humiliating way imaginable. He chose to step down. His empire, the monument to his ego, was now being run by a caretaker board heavily influenced by Donovan Ainsworth. For Sebastian, the ensuing weeks were a descent into a private hell. The paternity test results had been delivered to him by Carter Barrett. The news that the child, his miracle son, as a later ultrasound had revealed, was unequivocally his did not bring him joy. It brought him to his knees. It retroactively turned his actions from those of a wronged man, lashing out, into those of a fool of Shakespearean proportions. He had possessed everything he ever wanted, and had, in a fit of arrogant pique, set it all on fire. He was a pariah. Friends stopped returning his calls. Invitations dried up. He was left alone in the silent penthouse, a king deposed in his own empty castle, haunted by the ghost of the life he had destroyed. Genevieve, on the other hand, had flourished. She had moved out of the penthouse and into a magnificent brownstone on the Upper East Side, an Ainsworth property that had been in her family for generations. She had shed the Montgomery from her name, reclaiming her identity as Genevieve Ainsworth. Her pregnancy was the talk of the city, but for a new reason. She was no longer the pitied wife. She was a symbol of strength, a modern matriarch in the making. She graced the cover of Forbes magazine not as a socialite, but as a savvy businesswoman who had protected her family's investment and her own dignity. The article was titled "The Ainsworth Ascent: How Genevieve Ainsworth Turned Betrayal into a Boardroom Victory." She was now in her final trimester, radiant and visibly powerful. The fragile beauty had been replaced by a formidable grace. She ran her charities with renewed vigor and took an active role in overseeing her stake in Montgomery Tech, proving to be a shrewd and insightful presence on the board calls. The day her son was born was a crisp October morning. She named him Arthur Maxwell Ainsworth. She gave him her name, not his father's. A week later, Sebastian made his final desperate move. He appeared at her brownstone unannounced, looking like a shadow of his former self. He had lost weight. His expensive suit hung on him, and his eyes were hollow. The door was opened by her brother Donovan. "She doesn't want to see you, Sebastian." "Please," Sebastian begged, his voice raspy. "Donovan, please, I just want to see him. I need to see my son." From inside, Genevieve's voice came calm and steady. "Let him in, Donnie." Donovan stepped aside, his expression thunderous. Sebastian walked into the sun-drenched living room. It was warm and alive, filled with flowers and the soft sounds of a newborn. It was everything his penthouse was not. Genevieve was sitting in a comfortable armchair, holding the baby. Arthur was tiny, wrapped in a soft blue blanket, his face peaceful in sleep. Sebastian stopped a few feet away, his throat tight. He looked from the baby to Genevieve, the love, the regret, the shame. It was all in his eyes. "There are no words. Sorry is a pathetic insult. I was a fool. I was broken. And I broke everything around me." Genevieve listened, her expression unreadable. "You were," she agreed, her voice devoid of heat. "But your brokenness is not my burden to carry. Not anymore. Let me fix it," he pleaded, taking a hesitant step forward. "I'll do anything. I'll go to therapy. I'll give you anything you want. We can try again. For him." He gestured to the baby. Genevieve's gaze sharpened. "For him," she repeated. "You will not use our son as a bargaining chip to repair your pathetic ego, Sebastian. Let me be perfectly clear. We are never ever trying again. You destroyed that. You burned that bridge, and you salted the earth behind it." His face fell. The last flicker of hope died. However, she continued, her voice softening slightly as she looked down at the sleeping infant in her arms. "He is your son. He is innocent in all this, and he deserves to know his father, provided his father can prove himself to be a man worthy of knowing." She stood up, walking over to him. She held the baby out. "You may hold your son." With trembling hands, Sebastian took the small bundle. He looked down at the tiny, perfect face, and for the first time in his adult life, he began to weep. Not tears of self-pity, but tears of profound, gut-wrenching loss for the family he could have had, for the man he should have been. "He will have the Ainsworth name," Genevieve said, her voice firm, the new matriarch setting the terms of surrender. You will be allowed supervised visits, which will increase if and only if you demonstrate genuine, consistent change. You will contribute to a trust in his name, which I will manage. You are not my husband anymore, Sebastian. You are simply Arthur's father, and that is a privilege you will have to earn every single day for the rest of your life. She watched him, her heart no longer filled with love or hate, but with a cool, clear-eyed resolve. She had survived. She had won. And as she looked at her son, now stirring in his father's arms, she knew her new life, the one she had forged from the ashes of betrayal, was just beginning. In the end, the Montgomery Empire wasn't brought down by a market crash, but by a single act of public defiance. Genevieve Ainsworth turned her deepest humiliation into her greatest weapon, reclaiming not just her dignity, but control of her future. She proved that true power isn't measured in stock prices, but in the courage to tear down a toxic world and build a new one on your own terms. Sebastian Montgomery lost everything because he saw his pregnant wife as a liability, never realizing she was his most valuable and dangerous asset. What was Genevieve's most powerful move? Was it overturning the table or taking over the boardroom? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of strength and justice, be sure to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more unforgettable dramas. Don't forget to ring the bell so you're always the first to know.